Okay. Well, we're speaking today with U.S. Magistrate Judge Robert C. Mitchell, and according to the information that I was given, you were born in New York City on August 4th, 1940. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Good. Can you give us, to start off with, a little background on your parents?
Okay, my father was a civil engineer and my mother was a secretary.
And what was their level of, well, your
My,
father was obviously went to college if he was a
right,
civil engineer.
he had a master's in engineering, and my mother was a high school graduate.
Any siblings?
I have a sister.
And did you know your grandparents at all?
Yes, I knew all four of my grandparents.
Could you tell us a little about them?
Okay, they were all born in the area. It's either Russia or Poland, depending upon when you look at the political history. They all migrated here uh, approximately 1900. And they lived here, they worked here, they married here, had children here.
You were pretty much a city kid growing up, I
City kid, New
imagine.
York City.
What do you remember most from your childhood?
In what respect?
Of just in growing up, what schools you went to as a
Okay.
young child, that sort of thing.
I attended the New York City public schools. Um, we had family, friends, everything within the New York City area.
What sort of values do you think your parents instilled in you growing up?
Hard work, ethics, um, not to expect anything to be handed to me.
When you were real young, did you have any interest in the law? Any inclination you might have gone into law?
I always did, in the sense that I was always very inquisitive about things. Talked an awful lot. I remember, well, my parents had related to me that the house painter asked them to get me out of the house just because he couldn't stand me talking all the time.
You were probably something of a reader, I imagine.
Avid reader and still continue that.
What sort of things interested you in those days?
Uh, Adventure stories, mysteries, the Hardy Boys, that type of books, which I don't know if they exist now.
I think they do.
So,
I think people still read them, actually.
okay.
And you attended Dartmouth.
Dartmouth, that's right.
How did you end up going there?
It was just the complete antithesis of growing up in a big city. I had been accepted at a number of schools. My dad and I went and looked at them, and I just liked the complete rural life that Dartmouth offered.
Did that experience shape you particularly?
Um, I think it taught me, besides the educational aspects of it, it taught me to appreciate natural beauty, number one. Number two, to take advantage of cultural activities that were available, say like in New York, which, growing up there, I didn't take much advantage of a lot of them just because there were so many. Whereas at Dartmouth, there was a lack of many of these things, so that I appreciated what was available, and that has carried through. We attend the opera here, we attend the symphony, we attend the public theater.
Did you have any favorite professors or fellow students you were close to?
Well, I had a number of friends at school, and obviously went through school together, and we continued associating after that. I think the faculty was just outstanding. It didn't matter whether it was in the sciences, foreign language, history, social studies, whatever it might be. They were just an outstanding group of people.
Did you have a pretty strong leaning towards the law at that point?
At that time, I wasn't sure whether I wanted the law or to go into sciences, specifically medicine, and then I ultimately opted to go towards law. But I had this strong educational background in both the sciences and the liberal arts.
You earned a degree, an AB, in 1962, and then you
Correct.
went on to the University of Pittsburgh. Why did you go there?
I happen to like Pittsburgh. I had one of my roommates was from Pittsburgh. I had family here, and Pittsburgh seemed to be sort of a happy compromise between big metropolitan New York and totally rural Hanover, New Hampshire. and I have not regretted that decision in any way.
So you had a family connection here.
We had a family here, right?
And you earned 2 degrees at the University of Pittsburgh.
That's correct. I have an MBA and a LLB JD degree.
What do you remember about your legal studies there?
I found them challenging. I enjoyed some of the classes, some of them I didn't like, but I think it was a great preparation for moving on ultimately to this position.
Was there a particular area of the law that interested you then?
I liked constitutional law. I like criminal law, which are things that I still continue to do.
Did you go into law practice right out of school?
I went into private practice for about a year.
That was 1967?
67,
Okay.
right, to 68. Then a vacancy opened as a law clerk down here with Judge Rosenberg, and I applied for it and was accepted. And I worked for Judge Rosenberg for about 3.5 years, and the chief judge of the district court approached me and asked me if I would be interested in what was then the magistrate's position, now magistrate judge. And I said yes, and I've been here since.
Just so I'm clear, was the law firm that you were with Kaplan, Finkel, and Roth?
Correct.
And what were the partners like there, as you
They were
recall?
very nice people. They specialized in corporate work, and so I had that background for close to a year. And setting up corporations, doing research, writing for them, and then coming down here.
You were at you were the clerk to Federal District Judge Rosenberg from about 68 to 72.
Correct.
And you just applied for that? Was that
Just
how that
applied. A friend of
happened?
mine was clerking for then Judge Sorg, who was down here, and she mentioned to me that Judge Rosenberg had an opening and would I be interested, and I followed through, and he accepted me as his clerk.
Talk about the judge as a judge and a person. What do you remember about him?
He was a very conscientious person. He worked hard. He demanded, hard work from his staff. He agonized over many decisions, ultimately made the decision, and then moved on. But, for my purposes, it served for such a broad exposure to federal litigation, which, of course, now I've been involved in for 30 plus years.
What do you think you learned most from him?
Just to keep an open mind, I think. Give everybody a fair opportunity to be heard, and ultimately to make a decision that is the best decision that I could make at the time. Not agonize at it over anymore and move on to the next matter.
You were starting to talk a little bit ago about how you were appointed to the U.S. Magistrate position. Tell a little bit more about that, about how you came to do that.
Okay, Judges Marsh and Sorg, I think Marsh was the chief judge at the time, but approached me because the magistrate judge's position was, or the magistrate's position was a new position established by Congress, and I think the first appointments here were in 1971. There were 2 positions. Bud Schaffler, who was one of the incumbents, accepted the position here as clerk of court. At that point, Judges Marsh and or Sorg, and I just don't remember in which order it was, approached me to see if I would be interested. I said yes. I applied for the position and was selected by the Board of Judges for appointment in February of 1972.
What skills do you think you had that made you a good fit for the job?
Well, first of all, I think I had good writing ability, good reasoning ability, and also the experience of 3.5 years exposure to federal litigation.
I know the duties have changed some over time. What were the scope of the duties of the magistrate at that point?
Okay, I think they've changed very dramatically. When I was first appointed, I think there were 72 magistrate judges or magistrates in the country. That's all that Congress had appointed. And each court used the magistrates as the courts saw fit. In our cases, we received all prisoner litigation and Social Security appeals. And plus we did the former commissioner's criminal duties, that is, arrest warrants, search warrants, bail hearings, arraignments, etc. Since the early 70s, Congress greatly expanded the duties, now making it basically anything that's not inconsistent with the Constitution. The number of magistrate judges in the country has risen significantly. I can't tell you the number, but I'm going to guess somewhere around 800, somewhere around there. Plus, we have more magistrate judges here, and at this point, with the consent of the parties, we're handling all civil cases. We still continue to handle the preliminary criminal cases. But we've moved from what was originally perhaps more of a glorified law clerk position to being, I hope, contributing members of the judiciary.
What was your day-to-day work like at the start of your tenure here? What were the sort of things you were handling at the beginning?
At the beginning, we were handling all prisoner cases. That's habeas and prisoner civil rights. All Social Security appeals. We did not have law clerks at that time. We had one supporting personnel in the form of a secretary. And we did not make any dispositive decisions. We did reports and recommendations to the district judge on every case.
What was your relationship like with the rest of the judicial system at that point? I mean, did you see yourself as kind of like a somewhat elevated law clerk? Did you see yourself as a judge at that point?
I think when we first started, it was certainly more of a hybrid position. The philosophy being that we would be doing what law clerks couldn't do. And so in that respect, it was a step up, but still it was basically doing reports and recommendations to the district judges, in which case we were not making any final decisions, whereas now we're making final decisions.
You probably didn't step into the position with many preconceptions, I would imagine. I mean, that seemed fine at the time, or did it?
Well, no, it seemed fine. Well, of course, we were always hopeful the position would move forward, as it has done.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, my training as a law clerk had prepared me very well for the job as a magistrate, since so much of the work was the same.
The duties started to expand around 1974, is that right?
I'll take your word for it. I really don't know at what point it started to expand. But
I was reading about that, and that that magistrates could now conduct habeas corpus hearings around that time, which I guess was an incremental.
Okay, but at this point, with the consent of the parties in any civil case, including prisoner cases, we function in the same capacity as a district judge, and the appeal goes to the Court of Appeals. So basically, the position was an instrument created by Congress to create more judicial officers at a lesser cost than creating more Article III judges.
What do you remember about those days, let's say the 1970s? Was the work interesting to you? Does anything stand out from your experiences during that decade?
Well, it was interesting in the respect that I had never been exposed to a great deal of criminal practice. Now, as a law clerk, we obviously had criminal trials, but not the preliminary matter searches and bail and things like that. So that was something new. The other work was more or less an expansion on what I had done in the past. And then, of course, as Congress has increased the duties and the courts have increased the duties, and the position has gotten more and more interesting. And I've got to say, we're fortunate here in that our court is very willing to permit us to do as much as we possibly can.
Looking back in the 70s, were there any particular criminal hearings or cases that you touched upon that stand out to you, that were interesting or that tried your decision-making ability any?
Well, let's put it this way. Coming from a rather sheltered background, growing up and educationally, it was a whole new world to move into the goings on in the criminal proceedings. So in that respect, it was fascinating. Now, over time, the nature of the criminal charges has changed dramatically. When I first started, we'd get a lot of counterfeiting cases, not as much drug-related work, bootleg cases, and of course now, I don't remember the last time I saw a counterfeiting case, and bootleg. I don't know what happened to the moonshiners, but well, we haven't seen them here.
Did you gain any insight into the criminal mind, do you think?
Other than recognition that I couldn't understand it. I mean, just some of the crimes, even to this date, seem so stupid that it's really hard to understand what people think, but then I guess they think differently or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing.
Did you welcome the changes in the expansion of the duties?
Absolutely. We're at the point now where I'd say 90% of our work is civil, case dispositive, mediations. It's become much more challenging.
I guess it was about 1979 that magistrates could conduct civil trials, from what I'd read.
Okay. Again, I accept your chronology, but it certainly goes back a way.
Do you remember any of those early trials? Did you preside over trials pretty early at that point?
I've presided over trials, some of them more stimulating than others. Patent cases. Actually, I happen to find them rather interesting if they're well presented.
Tell me some cases that you found particularly interesting for whatever reason.
Well, some of them, I mentioned patents. I tried a case a couple of years ago concerning the imaging portion of the MRI, whatever you call the MRI device.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a tremendous educational process, and it was well presented. I felt I learned a lot. We wrote on it. Surprisingly, were affirmed by the Federal Circuit. And I say surprisingly because they affirm in less than half the cases, so that's the reason for that.
Any others?
I can't single out cases. I think just on a day-to-day basis, the cases, every day is different. Whether it's presently work discrimination or patent or trademark or contract or insurance, whatever comes down the pike.
There were some hearings that I know that you were involved with, and I thought I might mention them.
Okay.
They may not, they were hearings. They may not have created any strong memories, but I thought I would see if they might have. There was one involving defendant Joseph Minard, if I'm pronouncing his name right, who was charged with killing his girlfriend and daughter with a pipe bomb. That was back in 1999.
I remember the name. I don't remember much about it. I know I recently had the defendants in the death of the agent, the shooting
Christina
deaths,
Corby?
Christine Corby and her husband, yeah.
Without commenting further than what you did, what do you remember about those hearings?
Well, her hearing was fascinating, and that's a matter of public record because they played transcripts of her telephone conversations from the jail. And, it was fascinating just to listen to it.
Was that a trying experience? Was that difficult in some way?
It was difficult in the sense that the family of the agent were present in court. But other than that, I think after a while you just sort of get used to seeing all these people, and there's not the personal effect that a situation like this might have.
One other that was kind of interesting was shortly after 9/11 in 2001, there was a hearing for Kamal Albred and Haider Algomari, if I'm pronouncing their names right. They were Iraqi nationals, and they were accused of obtaining bogus Pennsylvania driver's licenses.
Right.
Remember anything from that?
I don't remember much about it. I remember what you're reciting, but I don't remember much about it.
Are there memorable attorneys or prosecutors that you've dealt with that stand out in memory?
There are. I don't. If you're going to ask me names, I'm hesitant to give names, but there certainly are some. Well, I won't mention name, but I remember I received a search warrant application for the office of an attorney in the city who enjoys a very stellar reputation, and I asked why he wasn't the subject of a grand jury subpoena, and they indicated that he had received a subpoena and indicated that he didn't have any relevant records, and they wanted to go and search it. And my take on it was I couldn't find probable cause, but just being aware of his reputation, that there'd be no reason to suspect otherwise, and nothing further ever came of it.
Over the years, would you say that you've developed an approach to the law that can be put into words?
I would say that basically every case we treat individually. We see if there's anything new or novel that needs to be addressed in them. A lot of them, turn out, when you get down to the nitty-gritty, to be rather routine and repetitive of other cases. But we try to give every case as fair a shake as we can, approach it with an open mind, and reach the best decision we can.
On the scale of severity, where would you say you come down? Would you say you're a severe judge, a little more humane?
I think humane. I don't know if the criminal defendants feel that way, but no, I think that, at the end of the day, I say to myself, I think I did the right thing, and that's the end of it.
Do you have a particular approach to bail hearings?
I think I tend to detain more people than some of my colleagues do, but I just feel that it's appropriate under the circumstances.
Is that based more on philosophy or more on experience, would you say?
I think philosophy as opposed to experience.
What do you think has been your most difficult decision, or are there several really difficult decisions you've had to make on the bench?
I suspect, probably from the standpoint of being on the bench, in the criminal realm of denying bail, in the sense that you're basically putting someone in jail before they've been convicted. And there's been a number of cases that have been very hard. Some of them just aren't. But there have been a number of them that have been very difficult, and I think that's the most wrenching decision because, in a civil matter, it can be addressed on appeal if need be. With bail, there's the immediate incarceration, which might be reversed on appeal ultimately, but meanwhile the person has been locked up for a period of time.
When you think about that, when you recall that, is there a person or a defendant that really comes to mind when you think about that, a particular one?
No one in particular. I mean, at the beginning when I first started, I think I'd be much more emotionally affected by it, but I've become more hardened over time. I still think I give them a fair shake.
I guess it was in 1990 with the Judicial Improvement Act that the title of your position was changed from magistrate to magistrate judge. Did that materially affect what you do in some way?
Insofar as the work goes?
The work and how you approached it and how others approached what you did?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the problems that it has created is that, at least in Pennsylvania, there's the confusion with the local JPs. I don't think it's the best title that it could have been selected, but there were arguments about different titles, and I think ultimately the Chief Justice came up with this title.
Is there room for improvement in the system, the magistrate judge system?
I think there's always room for improvement in any system. Fortunately, uh, we attend annual educational seminars where there is lively exchanges about ways of handling matters. Um, we just keep getting more and more information, more suggestions on how people handle things. I think that has helped a lot because when I started, I said there were, I think, 72 in the country. It was sort of hard to have somebody else to discuss anything with. Whereas now, not only do we have colleagues in the building, but all over the country.
Are there certain reoccurring problems that you would discuss with a colleague as far as issues that all magistrate judges encounter?
I think that's more on a court by court basis. Each court has separate problems, and I know the magistrate judges here, meet monthly, and we try to work out problems we're encountering.
Are they more systemic than anything else, or?
No, I think it has to do with some of the personnel we're dealing with.
I know that most of what you've done necessarily is routine, but are there any dramatic moments in the courtroom that you can recall?
We've had scuffles in the courtroom where the marshals had to intercede. But I wouldn't. Routine is sort of, I think, a difficult word because I think there's an implication of a tedium or boredom that is associated with it, and it just isn't like that. I mean, I've got to honestly say, in the 30 plus years that I've been in this position, I don't think there's been any day that I could say has been boring, not challenging, devoid of things to do. So I think I'm extremely fortunate in that respect. That I think very few people can, or at least of my friends, they'll say they got up in the morning and they didn't want to go to work, and I've never felt that way.
Where does the source of challenge come from, do you think?
Just the various problems that come before the court. Just everybody is unique. Again, you get to a point where some of the things are just become rather repetitive, but everybody has a different slant on something, and trying to get down to what is the problem. I love to do mediations, and I think it's meeting with the people, seeing what it is that their problem involves.
Is there a particular case, let's say a mediation, that was particularly puzzling, or particularly difficult one to untangle that you can recall?
I don't want to go into specifics, but some of them are rather straightforward. But some of them, there's just little nuances here and there that are necessary to address before any resolution can be reached.
Do they tend to be financial in nature, or are they more sort of personal?
They're both. Especially in the area of employment discrimination, there's a lot of personal feelings involved. In contract, it's dollars.
That's an interesting issue because, of course, that's coming up. There was the famous case of the firefighters that was just settled by
Right.
the Supreme Court. Do you, in your experience with those cases, do you have any particular approach or ideas about such cases?
Well, obviously, we're bound by the law as laid down by the Supreme Court and then our Court of Appeals. But in trying to mediate, in mediation you can slice the baby, whereas if it goes to trial, you can't. And I think that's what we try to do, just try to reach a solution that everybody can live with.
I would imagine some issues are more amenable to that than others, in the sense of people willing to compromise.
Again, I think a lot of that depends on the type of case, in that where personal feelings are involved, as in employment discrimination cases, it's a lot more difficult than in a straight business case where you pay me so much and I'm going to do this and we walk away.
Any discrimination case that comes to mind as one that was challenging particularly to sort out?
There have been a few. Again, I'd rather not
In
cite
general,
cases.
in
Yeah.
general terms.
Uh, yeah, there are some that are just so very blatant and insulting to the plaintiff, and there are some where the defendant just says, I've done everything I could possibly do, and I'm still getting sued.
We've talked about some of the more legally involved questions. Are there some some cases or moments in the courtroom that are particularly humorous in your memory that were funny?
Yeah, one comes to mind with the title of Magistrate. A litigant addressed me as Your Majesty, and I kind of thought that was neat. But I mean, every now and then things are said, and it's sort of hard to keep a straight face in the courtroom.
I would imagine if you're doing mediation that under the pressure of that, people might do and say odd things.
Oh, they do. I mean, it puts you in a funny position when the individual comes in and says, I was getting paid under the table. You say, I don't want to know about that.
Too much information.
Too much.
In speaking to other magistrate judges, I know that at bail hearings, that sort of thing can come up also, where people reveal sources of income that perhaps they shouldn't.
They shouldn't, or very often when you ask, are you married? And the response you get is common law. Well, in Pennsylvania, that has a meaning. In some states, it doesn't. But in Pennsylvania, it has a meaning. And it is not what the parties really mean to convey.
What year did you retire?
I retired 4 years ago, 05.
And were you recalled pretty quickly after that?
The next day.
And that was.
And that's a year-to-year recall.
Has your experience in that status been any different than your previous
No,
experience?
it could, in the sense that I can elect to take a lesser caseload. What I have elected to do is take a full caseload, the same as any of my colleagues. So I'm running a full calendar, with the exception of prison civil rights cases, which I do not take at all, just because there's a lot of busy paperwork, and as a recalled magistrate judge, I do not have a clerical assistant. So I just couldn't possibly handle all the paperwork. But other than that, I'm taking a full caseload.
You started to talk about this earlier in terms of what magistrate judges can take on, but in your experience, how different is what you're handling now from, say, 10 or 20 years ago?
I'd say it's like day and night, because we've gone beyond the prisoner case and the Social Security appeal to any case that's filed in federal court. With the parties' consents, we handle it to final disposition. Without the consent, we handle it through dispositive motions. So there's a tremendous difference in the workload now.
Do you sense this is mirroring changes in society, or is this just happens to be what you're getting?
No, I think, well, number one, the type case, I think, mirrors society, but the actual work we're getting is a realization that the judicial system is under a strain. And the more people that can be involved, the more expeditiously matters can be resolved, and hopefully more satisfactorily.
What keeps the job as interesting to you as it evidently does?
Every day, every case that comes in is different, and I can be having conferences on 5 cases in a day, and every one is a totally different aspect of the law and totally different type of problem.
Do you think you're a different sort of judge now than you were 10, 20 years ago, or when you started?
I think so. More than 20 years.
Going all the way back,
okay.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've grown tremendously, and just everything I've been exposed to and my ability to handle matters has just evolved.
Beyond the ability to take on the workload, what do you think has changed in your outlook?
In what respect?
In the sense of how you would handle a case, how you would approach it, if it has changed.
Well, I think with the growth of the work and more cases, you gain more breadth of knowledge, experiences that people have, and a greater appreciation of the type problems that they have.
That sounds a little bit like empathy, which is a word
Okay.
being bandied about right now, of course.
Okay, I'll take your word.
Okay. Well, I don't mean to put it in your...
No,
if you feel
I
comfortable with
think,
it.
you know what it is? I think all of us in our lives, when we're first exposed to something, we have a knee-jerk reaction, and as we're exposed to it more and more, perhaps it's not as rapid a response, and it's a more empathetic response to situations.
This might be a kind of a similar question to the one I just asked, but has your view of the law changed over time?
Just greater and greater respect for the law and our system of interpreting the law, the court system. And then again, as I've been exposed to more people within the system, a greater appreciation for it.
Have you ever considered returning to private practice?
Many years ago I did, but at this point, I think I've got the best of all worlds. So the answer to it right now is no.
Have you been involved with other professional activities during your years on the bench?
I've been involved with the Bar Association. I'm involved with our condo association. But that's about it. I mean, basically, I've got a full-time job, and I am taking courses at Pitt.
So it sounds like you anticipate perhaps the demands on you being greater or changing as long as you're on the bench?
Over time, I think we've seen that. I mean, just the general nature of cases before the court, it just keeps changing with the economy, with increasing legislation by Congress. The system just keeps growing.
Do you sense that the magistrate system is going to change as well? Do you think there's more that's going to be added to what you'll be doing?
At this juncture, I can't see how much more could be added, because basically, we're not Article 3 judges, but with the consent of the parties, we can function as Article 3, and I can't imagine how much more we could be doing.
Have you ever desired to be an Article 3 judge?
I think in the back of my mind, at one time, but I've come to... I like my position. I have no fights about it and no arguments. But I suspect everybody always looks for possible advancement.
Is the level of respect afforded a magistrate judge what it should be, do you think?
I think so. I think certainly within the legal profession, in the legal community here, they know the type of work we're doing, and I think we're well respected.
Are there former colleagues on the bench, particularly people that aren't here anymore, that you recall particularly, that stand out in memory?
People from this court?
Yes, yeah, or people that you worked with in any capacity.
Yeah, I would certainly say, I've mentioned Judge Rosenberg, Judge Marsh, Judge Sorg was a fine gentleman, and later people who have come on the bench. Of course, at this point, most people are younger than I am, so I'm sure they'll be around a long time.
Are there things they've done or ways of approach the law that you think you've learned from, or are all of you pretty autonomous in that way?
I think we're pretty autonomous, and it's sort of hard to adapt someone else's style. You've got your own style of handling things and sort of stick with it. But I know Judge Sorg was wonderful at settling cases, and his secret was he just sat there and said nothing until the parties got so uncomfortable that they began to talk. Well, I find that hard to do. I've tried it, but I can't do it. But I think you develop your own approach and go from there.
Is there any advice that you can put into words to someone that might be coming onto the bench as a magistrate judge, if you were taking them aside and giving them some?
I think keep an open mind, work to the best of your ability, and when you've reached a decision, accept the decision you've made and move on.
I know that you started off as a clerk. Are there any clerks that you've had over the years that particularly stand out to you?
My clerks have been great. I've had career clerks for a long time. In fact, one of my clerks is now partially retired, and he is working part-time. I've had great clerks. We've gotten along very well. Once or twice, it didn't work out as well, but I'm very happy with my staff.
I know you have a son and a daughter.
Yes.
Have they followed you into the law?
My son is an attorney. My daughter is a genetics counselor.
So that she followed a medical
She's
career
in
that,
the sciences.
that you
right.
might have done, yes.
Yeah.
Did you encourage them in any way in that way, or give them any advice about that?
No, I think they found their own ways. Just things that they were interested in. In college, I did take a genetics course, but that was sort of like at the founding stages of genetics. And my daughter's just been fascinated by it. And so that's what she's doing.
Anything that we haven't covered that we should talk about, professionally or otherwise?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
Well, thanks for coming over.
Well, thank you. Trying to think of. I think that's it.
Okay.